Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Fiona Musk, and I'm NHS Grampian's archivist. I'll be speaking about how health records can help you research your family history, and I'll go through some of the records that you might be able to find. I'll be using examples from the NHS Grampian Archives collection, although note that these do differ from records which may be held elsewhere. Health records can provide information on people who might not be recorded elsewhere, especially before 1855 and the introduction of statutory registration in Scotland. They can also be used to show where people were living and working, family relationships, and track movement between census and other records. Social history can also be researched, helping to build up a fuller picture of the time that an ancestor was living in. Prior to the formation of the National Health Service, or NHS, in 1948, hospitals were run by their own sets of managers and were independent of each other. They therefore kept their own records, and as a result, there are some hospitals which have a better collection of surviving records than others. On the whole, the type of records which do survive can include things like minute books, financial records, maps, plans, and of course, patient records. There might also be information on hospital staff, although this isn't consistent across each hospital. Hospitals were created for a variety of different reasons and for treating different types of illnesses. This includes general hospitals and infirmaries, mental health hospitals, infectious disease hospitals, and poorhouses which may have had a hospital function. But first things first. How do you go about finding out whether there are records for the person you are looking for? This is where you begin with the information that you already know and establish the basics. Where was the person you are looking for born? Where were they living? Although remember that the census or evidence from a valuation roll is only a snapshot of a particular time of year. How old were they? What did they do for a living? Do they vanish in between other known sources? Could they have died between a range of dates? Gathering as much information as possible does make it easier to rule out or add in possible matches. And once you have this information, it's now time to find out where the records might be held. Scottish indexes have a fantastic source of hospital information, including an index to mental health admissions across Scotland, which is incredibly useful. It is also worth looking at their Learning Zone, which has lots of information, video tutorials, and advice on the type of records which might survive and the information that can be found within. The index for the mental health admissions is from the Consolidated Register held in Edinburgh at the National Records of Scotland, and it's extremely useful to help locate and trace people through various admissions. They can then provide you with information from that admission register, along with what is known as a notice or certificate of admission. This was a required document prior to admissions to an asylum in Scotland, and I'll show you examples of these later, as there can be locally held copies of these. But what if it's not a mental health admission that you're seeking? This is where it can be tricky because few admission records have indexes, although there are some which are available. These include an index of deaths in Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, published across 4 volumes by the Aberdeen and North East Scotland Family History Society. They begin in 1743 and continue up to 1897, and they are an excellent source for finding people, especially as mentioned prior to 1855. I'm so grateful to those who worked on the project and to the previous NHS Grampian archivist Fiona Watson, who made the records available to the Society. Some other name indexes to records are also available online via the NHS Grampian Archives website, and this can be useful to narrow down a selection of possible matches. At the moment, there are 3 mental health hospital indexes for Kingseat Hospital at Newmacher, Ladies Hospital near Banff, and Aberdeen Royal Lunatic Asylum, now Royal Cornhill Hospital. So this does include some crossover with those available from the Scottish Indexes site. There is also an index for admissions to Stonehaven Poorhouse, the Royal Aberdeen Children's Hospital, and a register of deaths from tuberculosis within Aberdeen County, and that also includes some images. Now, these are the only indexes available at the moment from NHS Grampian Archives. However, there may be other collections held elsewhere which have similar online indexes. You can also find a list of records on the NHS Grampian Archives online catalogue, which is hosted by the University of Aberdeen. It doesn't provide online access to the actual records, and nor does it contain any name indexes, but you can find out what types of records survive for particular hospitals and the time period that you might be interested in. It could also show if there might be other types of records that could be useful to you. You can find out where other hospital records might be held using the Hospital Records database, which is operated via the National Archives in Kew. While the database itself is now defunct, the information is available to download as an Excel spreadsheet. This includes the names of hospitals and the relevant repository information for where the records might be held. And the database covers the whole of the United Kingdom. So again, this can be useful if you're looking for people who may have travelled throughout the country. Once you've found the record that you might think hold information, there are a number of ways that this can be accessed. The most satisfying is to visit the collections and see the original volumes via the Collections Research Room at the University of Aberdeen. This, however, might not always be suitable, so another way is to contact NHS Grampian Archives and request the information. This involves sending an email with as much information as you know, a gentle reminder to include the name and dates of the person that you might be looking for, and the archivist will see what can be found. This may take some time sometimes, as there is only one of me. Where there is no index, or where pinning down a date might be tricky, you may find yourself having to look through a number of different registers to try and find information. If you are easily distracted, be prepared. It does also help to bring as much information about other family members who may also have been admitted to hospital, as there could be other information to be found as well. Depending on the hospital, however, there may not be as many records to look through as others. There might also be other supporting information about their time in hospital, depending on the other records which have survived. Case notes are much rarer in survival, except when it comes to mental health admissions, where there is often a surviving record. These images show the different types of case records, including one from Aberdeen Royal Infirmary from 1752, explaining that a decision had been made to amputate a patient's leg following issues with his knee. Now remember, there was no anaesthetic at this point. There's another one from Dr. Gray's Hospital in Elgin, which shows the causes and treatment of various admissions from its opening in January in 1819. There's also a musical notation written by a patient in Aberdeen Lunatic Asylum in 1818, and another case note from Kingseat Hospital from 1905. But what if the person you're looking for isn't a patient? There are a host of other records where people can be found, and we'll take a look at some of these. The names of hospitals themselves can be used to look at families who may have lived in a particular area. All of the hospitals on this slide were named after people who either lived and worked or who left and made their money and used it to fund local hospitals. The dates given are when the hospitals opened, and it isn't a comprehensive list of all the hospitals within the NHS Grampian Archives collection, only those which are named after people. And as you can see, there are quite a few. But what if your ancestor wasn't rich enough to endow and found a hospital? Many people donated money either for their construction or for their ongoing upkeep. People from all over the country and beyond subscribed money to build Aberdeen Infirmary in the late 1730s. There is a list of these subscribers, and items like this can help with not only social history, looking at charitable giving, but also what occupations people had. They can provide information on the economic history of the time, especially as the infirmary managers wrote specifically to Scots in Jamaica in the 1750s to ask for more funds, as they knew that that was where the money was. Now, some of you may be familiar with the report which came out of NHS Lothian, which found that the infirmary in Edinburgh was not only bequeathed lands in Jamaica, but also the enslaved people on the estate. And this is where hospital records can help build a picture of different aspects of history. The infirmary records in Aberdeen also have information about wider events. This entry in the minutes dates from 1746, after the Jacobites had been in town. It describes how a party of rebels from Strathbogie, headed by John Hamilton, came to town and disrupted the council election so that no new directors of the infirmary could be appointed. They then put their wounded soldiers into the house, meaning the infirmary, along with some of the MacLeods they'd taken prisoner after the affair at Inverurie, and they stayed until the end of December 1745. In March 1746, the Duke of Cumberland came to Aberdeen in quest of the rebels, and he also put his army into the infirmary house. This meant that the usual running of the hospital wasn't able to take place until the confusion was over and a new election was taken. Now remember that the Battle of Culloden took place in April 1746. Cumberland's troops were in the infirmary until August 1746. So you can get a little bit of information about wider events. There are lists of subscribers and donors in various hospital records, and annual reports can be a really good way to track these down, where they've survived. It is in the annual report for the Royal Aberdeen Hospital for Sick Children in 1891 that there is reference to the donation of 2 rocking horses for use in the hospital, one from the Honourable Major Napier and the other from Mrs. McRae of Struan Cottage. Now, there are still rocking horses at what is now the Royal Aberdeen Children's Hospital over 130 years later. But this image here from around about 1889, 1890 shows one of the rocking horses in the old hospital building. There may also be information on staff, both medical and supporting. There are sometimes notes in the minutes regarding the appointments of senior staff, such as surgeons and physicians, matrons and senior nurses, but there may not be information about attendants, gardeners and other hospital staff. Some hospitals do have the odd register here and there, but there doesn't tend to be a list of every single staff member. You can, however, get another bit of social history too from the staff records, as this image from Maud Hospital shows the difference in the rates of pay for male and female attendants. There are few records within the NHS Grampian collections which relate to the work of individuals, except where there may be case notes written by a particular doctor. These don't include information on research that people may have been carrying out, but you can find such information elsewhere in professional society records or sometimes university collections. And again, there may be other collections within NHS archives across Scotland that have this type of information. There can also be information about land which was owned by hospitals as a means of income. There are also mentions in various minute books, including for Chalmers Hospital in Banff, which records the changing of tenants on some of the farms which they received rental income from. This image here shows that William Smith of Coldholm was accepted as the tenant of Backhill of Cluny in April 1894. Within the records for Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, There are other estate records for 2 estates at Towie and Canaldy, just outside of Aberdeen, which also include the names of some of the tenant farmers. So again, it's a good example of hospital records being used for non-hospital research. Supplementary information can be provided from local newspaper reports as well, which is something that I will come on to. Or they can be looked at as the source of information which leads to looking at hospital records, such as finding an obituary or a report of an accident. They can also be a source of amusement when the running of hospitals is reported, as this cartoon refers to Chalmers Hospital when the new lift was installed in 1928. It was discovered by 1930 that the amount of electricity used by the X-ray department meant that not everything could operate at the same time. The Evening Express published this cartoon showing a porter calling to a nurse while a lady waits at the lift. "Shut off the X-ray, I'm needing the lift." There are also other slightly quirky records in the collections too, which can be fun to look at. Some of you with eagle eyes may have spotted this already in the presentation. This is the wine book from Stephen Cottage Hospital in Dufton. And it records the spirits which were given to patients while in hospital. Whiskey, brandy, rum, porter, all provided. So that was a very brief look at some of the varying types of records that could be held. And now I'll go through some examples of real inquiries which have been received and the information that was found. An inquirer sent an email asking to make an appointment as they were looking for a number of different people where it was known that they had died in Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. This information mostly came from death certificates. After establishing a range of dates, the relevant volumes of admissions to the infirmary were looked out. And while the dates of death were known, the dates of admission weren't. And so reading through the registers was still required because these registers in particular have no index. And so it was doing this that one of the people being looked for was found. And from there, a bigger story was uncovered. The inquirer was looking for Mary Cooper, his great-grandmother. Her death certificate showed that she died in the infirmary of burns of face, arms and legs over the course of 3 days and of shock. The informant on her certificate was her son, Charles Cooper, and she was shown to be married to her husband, also Charles, with the usual address of 10 Berry Street in Aberdeen. Her son's address of Windy Wynd is just a couple of streets over. There is also a register of corrected entries noted in the margin, although this doesn't really give any more information as to how Mary came to be in hospital. And so this is where the infirmary admission register was looked at to see what it said. At the very bottom of this page, for the 30th of September 1896, there are 2 entries, one for Mary Cooper of 10 Berry Street and the other for Charles Cooper, also of 10 Berry Street. Both were admitted with burns, Mary to her face, hands and legs, and Charles to his face and hands. It's noted that Mary died on the 3rd of October at 10:25 a.m, but that Charles was discharged as cured on the 12th of October. Now, this already explains why it's her son who was the informant on her death certificate, as her husband was still in hospital. There are no case notes surviving for this time for the infirmary, and the admission entry doesn't give any information apart from showing that Mary's husband was also admitted to the hospital. However, the page was then turned over and some more names were recorded as being admitted on the same date with burns and other injuries. A further 12 people were admitted, all of them from different addresses, different ages, and different occupations. So what had happened? It's clear that there was some kind of incident, but the admission registers on their own don't give any further hint. And this is where newspapers can help build up a picture of events. Mary and Charles, along with many others, had been at the People's Palace on Bridge Place in Aberdeen when it went on fire. There were various newspaper reports about the incident over the following few days, as these entries from the Aberdeen Journal show, from the 1st of October 1896 onwards. Newspapers then were much like today, although sometimes even more graphic, and they give a description of the fire, a list of the dead and injured, a plan showing where the bodies were found, and an update to show Mrs. Cooper's death as a result of her injuries. 6 people died as a result of the fire, and the Aberdeen Journal continued to report on the investigation and subsequent fire recommendations. The building was burnt down, but it was rebuilt and it is still in use today. If that page in the admission register hadn't been turned over to see the subsequent names, it may have been harder to find out what happened to Mary, as her first name was not given in the newspaper. She was only ever referred to as Mrs. Cooper. There is no hint from her death certificate or the register of corrected entries that there had been such a major incident that they had been involved in. Another inquirer had also been using Scotland's People and had found from various census records that one of the people she'd been researching was a long-term patient in the asylum in Aberdeen and wanted to know what information there was. He was there from 1871 until 1901 and then appears on the 1911 census back in Lumphanan, where he was from. His name was Robert Galashan, or Glashan, and he was born around about 1834 with the occupation of a shoemaker. The various indexed entries from the census records on Scotland's People show Robert on the census in the asylum. Obviously, this is just the indexed entry, it's not the full pages, but it shows that he was there from 1871 and then his entry in 1911 back in Lumphanan. The name index from Scottish Indexes was used to locate his date of admission, and he was admitted on the 31st of August 1869. His address was given as Stothill in Lumphanan, and it's noted that he was married. He was 35 when he was admitted. Robert's certificate of admission, which, as you can see, the copy held locally in Aberdeen isn't in the best of condition, mentions an unnamed brother as also having been in the asylum previously, but it also gives the name of Robert's wife as Mrs. Skinner or Galashan, meaning that her maiden surname was Skinner. Robert's case notes give some information about his time in the hospital, and they also again repeat that his brother had been in the asylum around 5 years previously. The notes describe Robert's behaviour prior to admission, saying that he wandered about at night, searching for the celestial city, and he required constant watching by his friends in case he might do himself an injury. Now, the notes for such a long-term patient aren't that fulsome. There are minimal entries, given that he was in hospital for a number of years, but they do note that he doesn't speak. However, he did speak to one male attendant who came from his area, but that he will communicate in writing, although he doesn't write down why he doesn't speak. By June 1906, now at the age of 71, they note that Robert was working well with the shoemaker, and while he was now speaking, he did try to avoid doing so. He was described as being a regular patron of the dances, and he was discharged as relieved by the authority of the Lumphanan Parish Council on the 20th of June 1906 into the care of John Watt, a crofter in Lumphanan. Robert's wife had died a year previously, and he himself died in 1915 in Lumphanan at the age of 80. The name index was then used to find the admission of Robert's brother, George Galashan. He was admitted in November 1864. He was a farm servant, aged 25, and his address was given as Bridgend, Kincardine O'Neill. The place he was examined, however, was given as St Macher Place in Aberdeen, which was then the location of Old Macher Poorhouse, later Fonthill Road. Frustratingly, there are no poorhouse records surviving for Aberdeen City. But it also names some of his sisters, Barbara and Jane, who were also at Bridgend, and they were noted as being his next of kin. Although you'll note that there is no mention of Robert, and that's probably because he wasn't living at Bridgend at this time. George was described as having hypochondriacal fancies about his ailments, and he was discharged as recovered in April 1865. So he wasn't in hospital for very long, unlike his brother. As it is known that the admissions took place under the parochial board, or parish council as it was later known, information might be held in the relevant poor relief records. These are usually held by local authorities across Scotland, and in the northeast they're held at Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire Archives. The Aberdeen and North East Scotland Family History Society also has an online index of these records, which is available via their website, along with various other useful databases. And this is the result of searching for the surname Galashan with no other details completed. And you can see that you get Barbara Galashan, one of their sisters, George, and Robert. So there will be information somewhere in the poor relief records. So these records give further insight into the wider Galashan family, the number of known siblings, where they were living at certain points, and all of this helps to build information on the family tree. I'm going to stick with the mental health records for just now, and I'm going to show a further example of how the records can be used and the information that they can provide. Another inquirer got in touch, again having done research on Scotland's people, and had found that 2 people of interest had died in Banff District Asylum, or Ladysbridge Hospital as it's known. The first person that they were interested in was Alexander Jappy, who died in Ladysbridge in 1912. The second person is Catherine Mayer, who died in 1882. And so the name index on Scottish indexes was searched for Alexander Jappy, and this entry for him was found. But you will note that there is another surname, Shake, on this record. This is an interesting feature which does appear throughout his official records, including on his death certificate. Like Robert Galashan, Alexander's medical certificate gives more information than was originally known, as it mentions that an unnamed sister had also died in the hospital. However, it doesn't give her name. And this is where the additional name of Sheikh comes in useful. By names or tea names were common in the fishing villages and towns on the northeast coast, and they can help to distinguish between family groups. Now, the Jappy family were from Buckie, and this meant that it was easier to find out who Alexander's unnamed sister may have been. She was Janet or Jessie Jappy, and her admissions to ladies also have the surname Sheikh added. She was first admitted in February 1872, and her medical certificate gives her nearest relative as her mother, Mary Cowie, Sheikh, and a brother, George Jappy, Sheikh. Again, there's no mention of Alexander, much the same as on Robert Galashan's certificate. Not all siblings are noted. However, Janet or Jessie's daughter, Helen Riach, is also named within her medical certificate. This means that it was easier to find her next admission in June of 1897, where she is now known as Jessie. Her daughter Helen is now Mrs. James Jappy, Honesty. This means that he was from a different branch of the Jappy family, because his byname was not Sheikh. So this is something to look out for if you're researching families from this area. And it is notable that the official record also uses these, and this is to help distinguish between different family groups. You can see this on other records, such as valuation rolls. This one here from the Banff County valuation roll for 1914 to 15 shows various people and their bynames or T names. There's various cowies called Gully. There's another cowie called Coop or Cowp. There's John Cowie, known as Bullen. Um, and then there's a Mrs. George Jappy, Sheikh, and then other Alexander Jappies known as Lad. Now, these are all fascinating, really, really fascinating records, and it's great that they are noted on the official documents too. The second part of the inquiry was about Catherine Mayer, and it was known from her death certificate that she was a widow of William Anderson, who was a fisherman. She died in Ladysbridge in 1882. The index available via Scottish Indexes gives the date of admission as the 18th of September 1869, meaning that she was there for 13 years. However, there are a couple of discrepancies on each record regarding her age. She is noted as being 40 around her admission. Then in the death register for Ladysbridge, she's known as being 50. However, on her actual death certificate, she's noted as being 45. There are no female case notes from this time for Ladysbridge. And Catherine's certificate of admission is also in a different format to those we've seen before. She was admitted to the asylum from Banff Prison, having been remanded there on the 27th of August 1869 on a charge of malicious mischief. And so she therefore appears in the prison register index on Scottish indexes for Banff Prison. Frustratingly, though, her entry from the prison registers doesn't give any more detail on what form her malicious mischief took, but it does note that she was sent to the Banffshire Lunatic Asylum. And frustratingly, there doesn't appear to be any newspaper articles about her, but note that her occupation is given as merchant. These are good examples of how mental health records can show the wider lives of people, give some insight into what they may have been like, and also give details on other family members as well. The supporting information found within these collections is really interesting, and it also shows how being admitted to such a hospital can provide information on other sources of records as well, such as newspaper, prison registers, and poor relief records. Now, obviously, I've concentrated on the records held within the NHS Grampian Archives collection, but there are other NHS collections across Scotland as well. Some may be held by the relevant local authority, or they might be at a university. Note that a bit of artistic license has been used with regarding scale on this map, as Shetland isn't quite as close to Orkney as that. However, at least it's not in a box off the northeast coast of Aberdeen. The boundaries of health boards follow those of the regional council set up in the 1970s, so you might need to do some investigation into where a person may have gone, depending on where their parish is located. There are also some other important things to remember. As I have mentioned, each hospital will have different records, and that the same type of record might not survive for every single hospital. They are rarely indexed, and there might be restrictions on access depending on the age of the record. Medical records can provide information on people who might not appear anywhere else, but also be prepared for what you might find out. This has been a brief introduction to medical records and how you might be able to find them, what you can reasonably expect to find when the records have survived. Thank you for watching, and hopefully this has given you some more avenues to explore in your family history journey.